Little Walter O'Neill.
We were kids together, Miss St. John. I wouldn't have known you, Sam.
Well, I wouldn't have known you either, Walter, only I saw your picture.
My picture? Oh, yes, yes, of course. I don't want to be disturbed unless it's very important.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Spangelo, who is a co-founder and CEO of Swarm. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So, Sara, you hold a Ph.D. in Aerospace Engineering and have worked with small sats as well as autonomous aircraft at the University of Michigan. And you've also worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab as well as Google X. So I wonder if you can just real briefly give us kind of the highlights of your experience there, as well as how that has collectively really helped prepare you for the role that you're in today.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was doing my master's and PhD at the University of Michigan, I had the opportunity to work on CubeSat missions, which are small satellites about the size of a shoebox. And that was a pretty incredible opportunity, getting to design, test, and operate satellites that were going up in orbit and accomplish real science missions. So that was kind of the first exposure to the operation of satellite systems. And then when I went to JPL, which was kind of my dream job after my master's and PhD, got to work on small satellites as well as very large satellites, and was a systems engineer there on a variety of different projects. And I would say that experience led me to really understand the NASA way of doing things, very rigorous, very thorough. I mean, you don't land stuff on Mars accurately without that type of rigor. So that was a great experience. Then went on to Google X, and at Google X really learned how to develop products that would be launched into the real world really quickly. And I think all of those experiences were very valid in terms of preparing me for starting Swarm. When I was at X, I was also part of Rapid Eval, where new projects are developed, and had a kind of turn of doing entrepreneurship. And I think that also prepared me for this scary outside world of VCs and trying to kind of make it on your own outside of the cushy comforts of Google. So yeah, I think all those experiences were very different and provided me with perspective on how different parts of the ecosystem operate. And then at Swarm, we cherry pick the parts of each that we like in order to be successful as a quick moving startup that still has to do things very rigorously in order to obviously operate satellites in space successfully.
Yeah, what a profoundly kind of diverse set of experiences, because at JPL, and again, I think let's kind of predating the small CubeSats, if you wanted to send a larger multi, like literally tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars satellite into space, you needed to make sure everything was going to work, and it was going to work for years to come. So everything from hardening to just validating that everything's going to work in regardless of what temperature and harsh conditions up in space. It takes an incredible rigor that I think most of us really don't know or appreciate. And then at Google X, you're having to learn to have rigor, of course, but certainly it's a different kind of rigor because now you're focused on commercialization and fairly rapid pace of product development. So I wonder, as you are navigating Swarm, first, tell us a little bit about what is Swarm and how are you bringing some of those balancing discipline of rigor with the speed that's needed to survive and thrive in the private sector?
Yeah, definitely. So Swarm is launching a network of very small satellites to provide global affordable connectivity. Our satellites are literally, they fit in my hand. They're about 400 grams. We've put up 81 of these satellites, and we'll put up 12 actually on Saturday night, tomorrow night, and a total of 150 by the end of this year. And we provide very low cost connectivity, connecting sensors and devices across applications like agriculture, logistics, maritime, energy, and USG to bring back valuable amounts of data from these little sensors and devices out in remote locations to make informed decisions about, turning on or off an irrigation system or changing the temperature in a container ship that's crossing the ocean, or two kind of simple examples. And in terms of balancing kind of that rigor with speed, I think that that's something that every startup struggles with. And it is super important that we validate our technology. We have a solid regulatory strategy and execution, and then also a very solid go-to-market strategy. Those three elements are kind of what I view as the system that is a startup as we try to be successful. And of course, you're trying to do all of those things correct, but also very quickly. And I think you just kind of oscillate. Some days it's about speed, and some days it's about slowing down and making sure that things are correct. One of the main advantages we have with Swarm is that our satellites are so small. We build them fully in-house. We're fully vertically integrated, and we launch often. So that allows us to take more risk than probably any satellite company before in terms of what we fly. We obviously test things very rigorously on the ground with as much time as we have available, but we also have the luxury of being able to test certain features in space. And traditionally, like you mentioned, with $100 million, $100 billion programs, you just couldn't do that historically. So we're at that point where if we have a new power system, for example, or solar panel that we want to fly, we can literally just stick it on one of our satellites as a demo, throw it up into space, see how it does, and then iterate very quickly in our lab for the next generation.
Yeah, I think if we're having this conversation, let's say even 20 years ago, it may not have been as feasible. And this notion of rapid prototyping, rapid development, and validation and verification, it's unbelievable. And I think, given the fact that you guys are actually doing it in-house versus contract manufacturing or giving it to someone else, that gives you a ton of flexibility. And then talk a little bit about how you've been able to achieve flight heritage so quickly and relatively cheaply.
Yeah, so as soon as we raised our seed funding about 4 years ago, we set to work to develop the satellite systems and test them and so forth. And we were actually able to develop and launch satellites in 11 months, which is pretty unheard of for any space company. And then after that, we just have continued to try to launch as frequently as possible. Once again, I think it really comes down to the size of our satellites. We were able to fly 4 satellites in a 1U form factor. That's about 80 or 90K to fly. So that's, it's not cheap, but it's not prohibitively expensive for a company that's raised a few $1 million. And then to just be really thoughtful about what we flew, how we tested, so we can make the next generation even smarter.
Amazing. So really, I think in many ways, part of your core competency really has been your ability to design, but also execute, and the form that you're talking about. And I think what we're talking about is really, this specific niche that you're in that's supporting smaller packets, right? I mean, we're talking about what is it, 192 bytes per packet up to. And primarily focus on the Internet of Things, M2M space. So can you talk about the core IP of what you guys are doing and how you guys have done it better than others?
Yeah, so I think, again, it comes back to the satellite design. The main innovation with the satellites is the ability to stabilize without requiring the traditionally heavy and power hungry and expensive attitude control systems and orbit kind of maneuvering systems. So typical satellites have reaction wheels and star trackers and thrusters, all things to help the satellite orient itself in the correct direction and potentially spread out in orbit. And we've developed a scheme that is completely passive. So we threw out all of that equipment, and in throwing it out, we were also able to get rid of a lot of extra batteries and power systems, et cetera. There's a lot of kind of extra stuff around it, and really bring down and skinny down our satellite to a bare bone single board design. And then we added a battery, of course. And the way that we maneuver is we have a passive scheme that uses a combination of aerodynamic drag and gravity gradient, which are 2 disturbance forces you experience in low Earth orbit. It's kind of like a dart. You know how a dart stabilizes when you throw it, or an aircraft stabilizes because of its surfaces. It's kind of a trick like that, given some of the forces that we experience in low Earth orbit. So it's kind of a trick. It's kind of magic. And we actually have a patent on that. And then we also have a lot of IP in how we do our communication link. So we've developed our own protocol, our own networking schemes, and that allows us to really optimize the number of bits per second that we can move across our network, despite transmitting at about 0.7 watts. So it's kind of like a garage door opener. It's talking to our satellites in space at 500 kilometers, which seems like it should be impossible. But leveraging some of the recent innovations in RF technologies and then our own innovations that we've developed in-house, we've made that possible.
So I think at ease, in just a few seconds, you shared some of the key highlights of your IP, but each one of those things are pretty significant engineering milestones, right? I think the closest conversation I've had with this is there's a security company that's been able to basically strip away the entire kind of code base that you would find to protect and encrypt at the data level. But here we're talking about really fundamentally redesigning the satellite system entirely to essentially jettison the kinds of core components that everyone else is using, and in the process be able to actually of course make it smaller, make it cheaper, make it lower cost, and of course lower power, which means longer use. And that's mind-boggling. Now, how do you simulate, in terms of some of the physics around, some of the suborbital physics aspects, to know if in fact that was going to be enough to passively, move things around, shift things around, for instance?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really difficult to do on the Earth because obviously we have gravity and we don't have these disturbance forces that act as strongly. So, a lot of it was just based on MATLAB scripts that I wrote, or some of our consultants at the time wrote. I think we were like 4 people, so it's a pretty small team. And then we've also modeled the orbital dynamics using some commercial off-the-shelf simulation environments like STK, which is well used in undergrad, and even when I was at JPL, we used it, and that allows you to model the complex orbits that you experience and figure out whether things will be able to achieve their mission, which in our case is moving data from devices to ground stations successfully.
Wow. I'm curious to know how many iterations it took for you guys to get the design just right. But I want to ask, in terms of something that I think many are starting to recognize that it needs to be addressed, probably at a policy level or self-regulation level, which is this notion of collision avoidance, but also decommissioning of satellites. So in this passive context, using some of the disturbances up in the suborbital space, how do you decommission? How do you get it down to to burn out effectively?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's something we care a lot about in terms of collision avoidance and keeping space usable by all companies that want to put up satellites. So we're in these relatively low orbits between 400 and 550 kilometers. And our orbits actually decay slowly. So they experience a little bit of aerodynamic drag, just like an aircraft experiences. And that means, and we actually don't have propulsion to keep boosting them up. We have propulsion for collision avoidance only. So we're always experiencing a little bit of drag. So the orbits are actually always kind of shrinking lower and lower and lower and lower. And as you go lower, the atmospheric density is higher as you approach, being on the surface of the Earth. And once you hit a certain altitude, our satellites actually just fully re-enter and burn up. So nothing comes back down to Earth. It's totally a self-cleaning orbit, we like to call it. And our satellites typically deorbit within about 4 years.
4 years.
So that keeps the environment really clean.
Yeah, and that makes sense because of the technological advancement is so rapid that 2 to 3 years you may want to essentially have to have kind of new set of constellation anyways to updates, right?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Especially when we're building the satellites in-house, we're iterating very quickly. Mm-hmm. Most likely we'll replace them at a speed faster than that, every 4 years.
So I want to talk about this other notion of this direct communication down to, this swarm tile that you guys are using that has a very small footprint, low power with GPS built in. Uh, that's pretty profound because I know Link Global, for example, they're working on, I believe, more on the broadband side, but they're able to connect from the satellite to a cell phone directly without actually having to go through, like a gateway, or like a cell tower, essentially. How are you guys able to have this two-way communication directly from your CubeSats to these IoT devices, essentially?
Yeah, so in our architecture, the tile actually gets embedded within the third-party IoT sensor. So that could be moisture sensor or an asset tracker. And then we have a small antenna that we attach on the outside that has line of sight to the sky. Sometimes it works inside, but we recommend people put this outside, and typically the use cases are in remote locations far away from cities. And then data flows from the sensor to our tile, to the antenna, and then over the air up to the satellites. So very similar actually to how your cell phone operates today.
And because, again, because the tile is low power, and you usually, you would think you would need to amplify that that energy for the antenna purposes. How do you account for some of the, things that can be noise factors, whether it's the atmosphere or weather, and how good and reliable is that two-way communication?
Yeah, so absolutely, in any RF environment, noise can certainly influence the quality of your signal and ability to close that link. We use VHF frequencies, and those are actually very tolerant to local noise sources. So they tend to have properties of propagating in environments where an S band or Ka or Ku band may actually not close the link. And then we just make sure there's sufficient margin in our link, which is essentially the math budget to show that it should close the link and you can achieve a certain data rate, such that it works in a variety of environments, even when there might be local noise. In some environments, if you're right next door to a noisy generator or TV or something like that, we might recommend people actually just physically move their devices a meter this way or a meter that way, and often that solves the issue. But we've found that our system is generally very robust. People are able to turn this on in cities, in homes, in environments where we didn't anticipate it to work. So there's probably more margin in our system than we even anticipated. I think that is one benefit of having very conservative engineers on your team.
Let's talk a little bit about the service portion, right? So you're offering, was it 750 data packets per device per month at just $5 a month? What does that mean in a practical sense, and what are some of the use cases or applications where it's being used?
Yeah, definitely. So that $5 price point is really unique. If you look at existing competing solutions, they are typically 4 to 20x more expensive. So when we talk to customers that are monitoring pumps and boreholes in Africa, that's a company, SweetSense, that we work with, they might pay Iridium $10,000 a month now, and would pay only $500 with Swarm. And that's a huge difference in their operational model. There's other companies that are actually doing monitoring pumps and turning them on and off. And the ability to, everything in our network is two-way, so we can send messages back to the end devices. The ability to sense something is happening in a pump or in a water system, and then send back a message to turn the pump on or off is extremely valuable. That means they don't have to send somebody out in a truck, take the whole day to drive there to make one change, and potentially it's too late. And then we also do a lot of maritime monitoring, so monitoring boats and tuna fishing buoys that are going across the ocean, and then a lot of other ag tech and asset tracking, as well as a lot of trucking. So there was one customer that told me this story of the end of every day, it was one person's job to call all 200 truckers in New Zealand to figure out where they were. That was her only job. And of course, people don't answer their phones. Maybe they're busy, maybe they're confused of where they are, etc. They can completely wipe out that whole person's job and just put sensors on their trucks that can transmit to Swarm where they are, and then simply plot those and have all that information autonomously. So there's some really interesting opportunities to make businesses run more efficiently by having access to this data.
Now, I think we've definitely have looked at a number of many space startups in this category, and we are seeing a pretty strong growth, at least on the IoT side. But then the other spectrum is broadband, but also hyperspectra, metaspectra. Within the IoT side portion of it, smaller packet size, how do you feel like you guys would stand relative to the kind of growing competitive pack, and why you guys would stand out effectively in terms of market share?
Yeah, definitely. We're certainly the most advanced. So we have 81 satellites in space. I think the others have either 0 or maybe 2. So I think that's just a pretty obvious difference. And we also have raised all of the capital to put up our entire network. So we've raised a total of $35 million. That's more than enough to launch 150 satellites. And that is because of the technical differentiation. So we have the smallest satellites. We have quarter U satellites. All of the other competitors are launching 3 or 6 U size satellites. And then we are also very advanced on the regulatory front. We have the biggest markets. We have market access, which is just the regulatory framework required to operate and sell into those countries. And then our go-to-market, we have over 250 customers that are signed up and trying to get on the network and converting to become real commercial customers. So I think just the maturity and traction of what we've been able to achieve. And there's kind of a first mover's advantage, I think, when you're the first real option. I think a lot of customers are coming to us to take advantage of that and move away from some of the other solutions that are less mature.
Well, normally I think in a public setting, I don't usually make this statement, but you guys are killing it. So congratulations. My last question for you is lessons learned, as you look back at your career as well as your current project, what are some maybe failed project or product and the kind of insights that you gained that you can share with others?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many failures along the way. I think people tend to only see the successes. Most days are a lot of learnings and iterations. Let me try to think of something specific. I think early on, I had a tendency as kind of an engineer to want to wait till I had all of the information to make decisions. And even as a systems engineer, you kind of have to make decisions in uncertainty. But I think when you're running a company, especially an early stage company, doing something as innovative and hard and new as Swarm, you need to make quick decisions with lack of information. And now I'm getting a lot better at that. I just had an employee this morning be like, thank you for just making that decision. It made my life much easier. And the decision comes with risk always, but I think making decisions quicker and just deciding and just telling folks and saying, I'll take the fall if this doesn't work out, can be really advantageous. And I wish that hadn't taken me 4 years to learn, and I'd been more prone to do that earlier.
That's a great insight, and thank you for sharing with us. So I've been joined by Sara Spangelo, who is the CEO of Swarm. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.